I measured myself on the scale of 1 to 10, and then I plotted it on a little graph in a circle. And then at the end of the year, I plotted it on a circle, and I could see growth in all these areas. So my well-being, my health was better. My relationships were better. And believe it or not, my business grew significantly. And I chalk that up to the fact that I had more available to give to the business because I was practicing self-care. And so I was present with more. I was clear on what I needed to do. I wasn't as frantic. I was more focused.
I'm Casey Main, a jaded, hopelessly romantic, health-conscious party girl searching for meaning. And my mission is simple: to make life better, for myself and for you. I believe real change always comes from within, and the Better You podcast was born to discover hidden parts of ourselves and our stories. A safe place where we have real, honest conversations with people from all walks of life to help better understand ourselves so we can become better versions of ourselves. So come along on this journey of discovery with me so you can become a better you. Welcome back to another episode of the Better You podcast, where our focus is better understanding our relationship with ourselves. I am your host, Casey Main, and as always, I thank you so much for being here. I am very appreciative that you have decided to spend the next hour or so with me and this podcast. In this episode, we are talking about living your best life, and it's a really popular motto and totally a trending hashtag, but what does it really mean to live your best life? Like in a realistic way, not as an Instagram model. Today's guest has a great story and super helpful insights on how he actually did it. But first, I want to give you all a little glimpse into the future and episodes to come. So I'm going to continue the 2 episodes per week throughout the month of April. And then in May, I'm going to go back to 1 episode per week every Tuesday. Hopefully, many of us will be out of quarantine and back to our normal routines by then. Hopefully. But in the meantime, there are some really cool episodes coming down the pike. So next week, we will hear from Dr. Austin Perlmutter about his new book, Brainwash, that he co-authored with his father, who is New York Times bestselling author of Grain Brain, Dr. David Perlmutter. I'm super excited for that conversation. And then the week after that, we're going to hear from Talia Pollock, who is the author of the new cookbook, Party in My Plants. And her and I had a lot of fun talking about plant-based diets and how to make them more feasible and more fun. And then just all the changes and health benefits she realized in her own life when she switched to a more plant-based diet. A couple other guests that I've got lined up include Katie Buman, who is the host of the Real Rebel podcast, Kate Swoboda, who is the author of The Courage Habit. And I'm also in the process of booking guests to talk about astrology and then also a system called Gene Keys, which is a branch off of human design. So lots of cool stuff coming up. But before we get into today's episode, I want to talk to you all about your armpits. That's right. So we often don't really take into consideration how just the simple swipe of a stick on our underarms can be detrimental to our health. But unfortunately, it really can be, because listen to some of the ingredients that are found in virtually all drugstore deodorants. There is aluminum, which has been linked to Alzheimer's disease and heavy metal toxicity. There are parabens, which are endocrine and hormone disruptors found in 99% of breast cancer tissue. Fragrance, which is essentially a cocktail of chemicals creating skin sensitivities and irritations. There's propylene glycol, which I might not even be pronouncing correctly, which is a known skin irritant. And triclosan, again, don't even know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, which is linked to liver toxicity and thyroid dysfunction. So, these risks are just not worth the convenience of picking up a deodorant while you're at the grocery store. Which is why I really want to recommend that you all try Primally Pure. Their natural deodorant is made with only a few pure ingredients, so no room for any of the cheap fillers, and they allow your skin to breathe and function as it's supposed to. They consist of nourishing oils, vitamins, and essential fatty acids, so your armpits will be happy, healthy, and odor-free. So go to primallypure.com, and then you can use the code TheBetterYou, all one word, TheBetterYou, at checkout for a 10% discount. Personally, I use the charcoal deodorant, and I absolutely love it. All right, so let's learn more about our guest today. Tony Loyd is a best-selling author, keynote speaker, and coach. He is the executive producer of the podcast Social Entrepreneur, where he shares positive stories from underrepresented voices focused on solutions. Social Entrepreneur is downloaded more than 500,000 times in over 180 countries. He is a TEDx speaker and the best-selling author of Crazy Good Advice, 10 Lessons Learned from 150 Leading Social Entrepreneurs. He is a former Fortune 500 executive with companies such as John Deere, Medtronic, and Buffalo Wild Wings. He has extensive experience in strategic planning, talent management, and leadership development. And in this episode, we discuss the importance of our values aligning with our career, the conflict between the hustle and grind mentality and self-care, the truth about why we are depressed and if it starts in our brain or the way we live our life, asking yourself, why do I work, and how to find purpose and meaning in the work that we do, a defined, measurable way to actually live your best life, using commitment and accountability for self-work, and how all of our bests look different and change throughout different stages of life. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, I ask that you please share it with a friend or 2 or 12. And if you have 2 minutes to spare, then give the podcast a rating and maybe even also write a short review. It means a lot to me, lets me know that I am on the right track with the content I'm bringing you all. And then in terms of the algorithm world in podcasting, it really does help a lot with discoverability and growing the show. So if you can take 2 minutes to give the podcast a rating and even write a review, I will just thank you so much. All right, so that's it. We're going to go ahead and jump into this conversation with Tony. Enjoy. Okay, so let's just dive right into really probably the heart of your story, because there's a part of it that I've either heard you speak on or you've written about that just really resonated with me on a personal level, because I had a very similar experience. And that was this big realization you had that you mentioned to a friend. I think you guys were having lunch about like how you were feeling about your life in general. So let's start there and then we can kind of backtrack. So tell us about that moment.
Sure. My friend met me for breakfast, actually. He and I came into this little pub, and we came in and we sat across the table from each other. And he said to me, or he asked me this question that, we just sort of ask and answer every day, all day. And it was, how are you? And I was, for whatever reason, it struck me sideways. It was one of those things that landed on me, and I said, okay, do you want to tell him the truth? And so his name's Michael, and I just said, okay, here's the truth. I'm depressed. And he didn't back away. What I appreciate about Michael was he was totally present with me, just totally locked on me. And he goes, say more about that. What does that look like? And the words that came out of my mouth, it kind of shocked me and it shocked him. But what I said to him was, I don't want to be alive.
Oof.
And and when those words came out of my mouth, that I had 2 things that happened simultaneously. The first thing that I had to do, I had to just immediately follow that up with, I don't want to harm myself. I don't even know that I want to die. I just don't know that I understand the point of all of this. That I get up in the morning, I eat my breakfast, so I'm taking in some calories, which means that I now have the energy to go out for a run, or I go do some work, and then, I go through my day and I burn the energy, and I eat some more food and I burn the energy, and I go to bed and I get up the next day and I do it all over again. And like, what am I doing exactly? So kind of what's the point of all this? But the other feeling that I had in the middle of that is at the time I was 60 years old. You know, I was born in very poor circumstances, but I rose up through the ranks of Fortune 500 companies and was executive and all that. And I even was able to retire at the age of 55 and go do whatever it was I wanted to do. I have this wife who adores me and I adore her. We live in a lovely home. We have a pet that we love. It's like I have everything that everyone else is praying for. And so I was immediately flooded with guilt and shame for having even expressed that feeling. So
Mhm.
so that was the beginning of this sort of conversation, and it sent me off on a journey.
I That resonates with me like just on a deep, deep level because I had a very similar experience and it was coming up on I guess 3 years ago. And I'm driving home from work and kind of out of nowhere, I just had this thought of like, I don't care that I'm here. And again, then immediately, and I wasn't talking to anyone, it was just all in my head. But then immediately I went into, okay, well, whoa, no, like that's not an okay thought. Like I would never do anything. Like would I ever hurt myself? No. And all of that. But it was this wake up moment of like, wow, that's a big thing to say. But then immediately followed by guilt, where then logically my brain listed all the things that were quote unquote great about my life and pretty much tried to talk me out of how I'm feeling. And I think that's a very common theme because we tend to not necessarily validate our negative feelings, but instead try and talk ourselves out of them. And the logic we use is usually comparing ourselves to other people in worse situations or just like calling out the good. But that doesn't negate the bad feeling.
Right. Yes. And before we started recording here, I mentioned this that I heard a psychologist the other day. I started to say I heard her on the radio, but actually it was on YouTube, and she was saying as we go through this current environment, and there's really a lot of trauma that is coming into the world right now, and everyone is going to be touched in some way by this pandemic, and it's really going to be horrible. And she said, if you don't express those negative emotions that you're having, if you don't admit that you are either angry or afraid or sad or whatever those emotions are, then your body will act them out. And so it really is a good thing to say out loud the thing that is inside of you that you are struggling with. So I think it's important that people be able to do this. And if you would have asked me before that, is it okay for someone else to admit that they're struggling with their mental health? I would, oh yeah. I mean, if you have any mental health issues, come talk to me. I'm here. I'm here for you. But for me to be the person who's actually saying those words out loud, I almost didn't give myself permission to say it.
Right, because you had a great life.
Yep.
You have like everything going for you
Yep.
these
Yep.
days.
Yep.
And all right, so share a little bit more about what your life looked like prior to this moment. You mentioned kind of Fortune 500 career, like
Sure.
what's a little bit more about your background?
Yeah. So I was, born in fairly poor circumstances. Grew up in Arkansas. Um, you know, didn't really come from wealth and privilege, and yet, just by virtue of being born inside of the United States, that's a privilege in and of itself, right? And so I had a pretty good career. I started off in a very technical area and did some consulting work, and then I did some work around human performance within organizations and how do you improve performance and shift cultures and all this kind of stuff. And eventually I was recruited in by a Fortune 500 company. I had just sort of this rocket ship career within that framework. I didn't go into Fortune 500 companies until I was maybe 35, 36, something like that. And I just sort of shot up through the ranks. It was just this very fortunate opportunity for me that people would see me and they would like me and they would promote me up to the next level. And so I did really well in that career, but let me not paint too rosy of a picture of it. I mean, you are inside of a Fortune 500 company and there is this constant battle. One thing about corporations in general is they are very shareholder centric. So they focus on shareholder value, and sometimes corporations do that at the expense of their employees, of the community in which they work, of the planet, of all these other things. And so, I my value system, I care about all of those things. I care about society in general. I am a progressive kind of person, and so there was always a certain tension, and just giving you one little anecdote here. There was this moment in where I was a vice president of a company, and someone from our government affairs organization came to me and said, "Look, we're going to go to DC and we're going to lobby for some bills coming up." And I'm used to this. I can do this sort of thing. And I said, "So, what's the big agenda for us this year?" And he said, "Well, there are a lot of bills in different states and in Congress to try to raise the minimum wage, and we want to go oppose that." And I was like, "Well, actually, I bat for the other team here." I think that if we don't pay a living wage, then society in general has to pay that wage, and so you and I, as taxpayers, we have to end up making up the difference between what companies pay and what employees need in order to make a living. And then, yes, we have full employment, but that's because people are working 2 and 3 jobs in order to feed their families. And so, actually, I'm that's not who I am, and I just can't do that. And so there were these moments along the way that kind of told me that I probably was not in the right career, but it paid pretty well. And so, we socked away some money. And so by the time I was 55 years old, I was fortunate enough to be able to retire. Um, but I am not a sit at home and sit on your hands kind of guy. So I started my own business, and I've been doing consulting and coaching, and I do workshops, and I have a podcast, and I wrote a book, and and public speaking, and so all these things are happening. But one of the things that I did, in my corporate career, in a big role like that, you tend to not sleep. You have phone calls at 2 o'clock in the morning with somebody who's in Japan or in Australia. You get up early some days in order to go into the office in order to get a whole bunch of things done before anybody hits the ground. Because once your team is in, you want them to have everything they need in order to go running and go do all the things that they're going to do. And so I really was not practicing self-care. And what I did was I took that bad habit of really hard work and lack of self care, and sort of this other focus, right? So I always thought of myself as the least important person in the room, which is healthy, but just like any value or any skill, when taken to an extreme, it doesn't serve us. And so I had just taken all this, and I wasn't sleeping well. I was working like a maniac, and Casey, I know that you will understand this, that there are so many possibilities out there, right? And everybody's telling you, "Oh, fix the SEO on your website. Oh, you should do webinars. Oh, you should write a book. Oh, you should, and it's like flavor of the month. Oh, you should be doing Facebook Lives right now." And so it was like I was doing all this stuff. I was spinning all these plates, and I just kind of felt like I was being met in the marketplace sort of with crickets, right? And you know how that is when you like write that blog post and you just go, "This is killer. I have poured my heart into it." And then you share it around and you get crickets. And then, of course, sometimes you write some offhanded thing, you throw it up and lightning strikes. So I have no idea how this stuff works. But I was not practicing self care, and I was socially isolated because I work from home. I don't get out a lot. Any team members that I have, they're very remote. Some are around the world. That I have some virtual assistants and people that work with me, and so I really had set myself up in an environment that was not conducive to thriving. And I'll just say one more thing about this, that as I'm sitting here, I'm looking through my front window, and there's a maple tree, and the tree is beginning to bud, and it's really going to be beautiful here in just a few weeks. But if that tree was not budding, I wouldn't take a stick and go out in the middle of the yard and start whacking it and say, "You stupid tree, what's wrong with you?" I would say, does it have the right soil? Does it have the right water? Is it in the right climate? Is it, is the sun shining on it? What's going on? What is happening within the ecosystem that is causing that tree not to thrive? And yet at some point, I forgot to do that for myself. So that was probably too long of an answer, but that's
No, no,
that's
no,
kind of
no.
the background.
That's perfect. What I find so interesting about it is, you had the big successful corporate career that wasn't completely aligned with your values. It probably didn't like light your soul on fire, but you did it. You put your time in, you were smart with your money so you could leave it early. A lot of people, I think, get to these points of disconnection because they're in that world where the work they're doing, they don't think is meaningful or they don't feel extremely connected to. But it's like you left that, went into arguably more meaningful work of, book and podcast and writing and speaking. Yet that wasn't the fix because you did that, but it's like you did it at the expense of really taking care of yourself.
Yeah, what was really interesting was it wasn't until I left my corporate career that I found this phrase social entrepreneurs. And so these are people who are making money, but they also are, living with meaning and they're making a dollar and a difference. So these are people who start up companies that have a social impact or an environmental impact. So, there's a company called Evernew, and they gather up, tens of thousands of tons of cotton fiber, and it normally would go into the scrap heaps. And they have this process that they have developed to break those fibers down and then to reconstitute them into a new fiber that can be sewn and dyed and cut and everything just like fresh cotton can be. And so, they are taking all this waste out of the waste stream. They're keeping people from producing new toxic materials. They're just, it takes like 700 gallons of water to make one cotton t-shirt from, even organic cotton. So they're taking all this waste and all this stuff out of the work stream, and they're creating stuff that now they're partnering with, like Adidas or with Levi's or different companies to make things from that material. So they are making a dollar and they're making a difference. And so some companies are like starting. Here in Minneapolis where I'm at, one of my favorite little companies is a grilled cheese sandwich shop, and it's called All Square. And what All Square does is they hire formerly incarcerated people, and they help them to get a job and housing and all that, and then they train them in culinary skills, and they employ them. They have an institute that's teaching them about everything from a restaurant, from food safety through how to manage the books. And they are employing these people, and they say, you're all square with society. You came out, and so you're all square with us, and so we're going to employ
Ah.
you, right? So there are all these companies that are doing social good, and I have been interviewing them, and that's what the book is based on: is these social entrepreneurs, these people who are just like big-hearted, kind people. And so there's something here, right? There's something in there that is so aligned with my values, and I'm trying to build a company that is in line with these values and is giving in those ways. We're social by what we sell and who we sell it to. We're social by how we source, and so all these different ways that we can be do social good. And at the same time, I mean, anybody who starts a startup knows that it is a grind,
Mhm.
and and you have to be just a little bit crazy to do this stuff. And yet, there is a way to do this and practice self care, and that was sort of the missing piece for me.
So that is like, again, I feel that on a deep level too. And it's been interesting as I left my corporate career and have kind of gone out on my own. And I kind of just did it because I got to this point where it's like I just had to, like, just for
Yeah.
my own mental everything, I just had to. But I didn't really approach it from okay, I'm starting a business standpoint with like a business plan and plans
Mhm.
for revenue streams and marketing and all that stuff, which is funny because I have an MBA, like I should know how to do this, but I didn't, like, I was just not in that mindset.
Yeah.
And And now I've come back a little bit more around to that. Like, okay, Casey, you've got to be smarter about this. It is a business and all that. But to your point, then you get into this world of there's always something to do. And without reporting to a job and then, leaving at 5, 6 or whatever, like you're leaving the office, it's like there's no end time. So you end up working well into the evening or all throughout the weekend. Like I put in more hours now working than I think I have at any other job. And there very much is this kind of push out there and a whole group of people that will argue and promote the hustle and the grind. And you
Yeah.
wake up at 3 a.m. and you barely sleep. And I've got people in my life that I've gotten into kind of heated discussions with because that's how they think is the only way to make any kind of startup business successful. And I kind of just keep thinking like that can't be. Like we have to be able to take care of ourselves. So I'm with you that I think that balance exists. I have by no means perfected it, but like I'm trying to desperately.
Right. I agree. I think there is this mythos. And one of these days soon, I'm going to make a little video, and I think I'm going to call it Everything I Thought I Knew About Hustle and Grind is Wrong. Because there is this sort of, people who are going to be screaming at you, well, if you're not making the progress you want, you shouldn't be sleeping so much, or, stop sitting around with your family, start doing something else. So,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody can find something else to fit in the crack of their days. And, we can always do more. And at some point it becomes this obsession and it's not healthy. So, I hear what you're saying. I think you are exactly spot on with that if you're not practicing self-care, none of this other stuff really matters.
Right. And I think especially if you're trying to stay in the, you know, working within your passion and really putting yourself out there. Like if I'm not taking like my work is my writing, is this podcast, which is all very much my thoughts, my view of the world to try and get me thinking to help get other people thinking. And it's like if I'm not taking care of myself, then that the product, which is kind of me and how my brain works, that's going to suffer as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. One of the gifts that came out of that time. So I had that conversation with my friend in December of 2018, and right after that conversation, he sent me a book, and I highly recommend it. It's called Lost Connections: Why You Are Depressed and How to Find Hope.
Mm,
And it's by a guy named Johan Hari. He searched the world, he traveled the world, and he talked to all of these top experts about what causes depression and anxiety. And what he found was that there are 9 different causes of depression and anxiety, but only 2 have anything to do with your genes or your brain chemicals. And
mm,
so at that point, when I'm feeling all anxious and depressed and sort of unhinged, if you would have asked me what causes that, and in fact, my friend Michael did ask me what causes that. And what I said to him was exactly what had been said to me by every doctor and psychologist and every person I'd ever talked to about it. It's, well, your brain is low on serotonin and, you have a broken brain and you need to do something to boost your serotonin. And maybe you can do it through St. John's wort, but if you can't, then maybe you should take some chemicals and, blah, blah, blah. Well, Johann Hardy sort of blew that myth up. He was saying, yes, there are changes in your brain chemistry. There's very little evidence that raising or lowering serotonin actually does anything to lift or suppress your mood. But sometimes when you are depressed, you do get lower serotonin. Which happens first? Are you depressed, then you get low serotonin, or do you have low serotonin, therefore you get depressed? And so there's not a lot of evidence that says either way. But he found these 9 different reasons why people are anxious and depressed. And what that did for me, Casey, was it gave me a sense of control, right?
mm-hmm.
It helped me to say, so if he says in his book, he says sometimes we are, we're anxious or depressed because we are disconnected from other people around meaningful values, or we're disconnected from nature, or we're disconnected from status and respect, or from, meaningful work, or we've never really dealt with our trauma, or whatever these other connections are. What it told me though was that I have the power to do something about those things, that I don't have to say, oh, my brain is broken, therefore I'm acting this way, and therefore, I need to go take a pill. right? So I think that was a real gift for me.
I love that. And I love that kind of the reasons he gives are all, or they sound like a lot of them are related to connection. So like probably our
Right,
connection to, you know, to others, our connection to meaningful work, our
right.
connection to nature, which I think when you're in that hustle, grind, go, 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 checking off the boxes every day, like just getting done what you feel like you have to get done, there isn't time for there certainly isn't time for all those connections. So even if
Right.
you're doing meaningful work, but you're all consumed in that, like I guess it comes down to balance. And I know there's different philosophies towards this. So I think is it Zig Ziglar who has the wheel of life thing with the different mental, physical, spiritual, whatever. Like it's kind of like at some point we all got to wake up and realize these are all at the core saying the same thing. Like we've got to
Right.
live a balanced life where there's connection in many different realms, like not only family, not only work, not only our social lives. Like it's got to be a little bit of everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I just went back and this is going to sound a little bit like I'm bragging, and I really hate to brag, but let me just do that. Okay.
Yeah, go
Uh,
for it. Brag.
yeah, I did a, TEDx talk a few years ago, and it was at Duke University. And the topic of the TEDx talk was the purpose of work. And I didn't know that at the time that, 3, 4 years later, I would need to watch it to learn for myself about this thing, right? I had sort of forgotten this thing. But the whole point of it was, why do we work? And right now, the economy is tanking. Companies are just going to shed employees like crazy. We all are going to have to come to ground, and we're all going to have to look around to each other and say, so what was that about? What was I trying to achieve with work? And so the easy answer is I have to spend money, right? Because I have to take food from the grocery store and put it in this pot, and then I have to put it in my mouth. So that costs money,
Hmm.
or I have to pay rent, keep a roof over my head. And so I need money. And so therefore I go to a job and I make money. But in the end, if you think about it, on average, every American spends 36% of their time on a weekday either sleeping or doing personal grooming. So that's 36% of your time. And 37% of your time during a weekday is spent at work. So now 2/3 of your entire time is taken up with either sleeping or preparing for work or going to work or coming home from work. So, what that tells me is that that's how we're spending our time. And the way we spend time is the way we spend our lives. And
Hmm.
so, if we're going to live a life of purpose and meaning, we have to find a way to bring purpose and meaning and values to the work that we do, that it has to be in alignment with who we are and what we value, and the kind of contribution to the world that we want to make. So I think that's an important lesson that I think is going to be coming up for a lot of people in the near future as they, either wonder what just happened to them at work, or maybe they're going to be thinking about what do I want to do next, or how do I make a living right now in this crazy economy. I truly believe that right now, given the situation that we're in, we've just put rocket fuel behind AI and bots and automation, and that's really going to catch on in a bigger way. It was a transformation that was happening in the workplace anyway, but now it's going to be accelerated. That means that a lot more people are going to never go back to the jobs that they had before. So we're all going to have to come to ground, and we're all going to have to get centered here, and we're all going to have to ask ourselves, why do I work? And so that's going to be a fundamental question that each of us is going to have to answer.
Yeah, I love that. And so like a couple things. So yes, I think the why do I work and aligning it with values, passions, whatever it may be, both those are important, but I think you can almost look at them a couple different ways. So I'm a big believer in, working in something that you feel very passionate about. But I also know that a lot of people hear that and they're like, ugh, they get annoyed because they're like, that's not they think they can't do it for whatever reason. And so I think also on like a deeper level, it can be a wake up for, okay, what is your attitude towards work? So if your why for your working is solely to provide money, to provide food and roof over the head, and that's it, it's just a logistical thing, then recognize that. If that's how it is in your life, then fine. But then know that you've got to plug all those connection holes, like when you're not in work. Or, maybe if you're really passionate about just like connecting with people and, not necessarily these very defined passions of something that falls in like art or technology or writing or whatever it may be, but it's more, it can be like an attitude reset for how you look at work. Like, okay, I'm going to go into work and I'm going to be really patient, and I'm really going to connect with my coworkers and foster human connection there. And I'm going to work on, not getting my feelings hurt when I get constructive criticism and like that kind of stuff. So I
Yeah.
think sometimes especially those of us who do the kind of work that you and I do, can get all on this kind of high horse of like, oh, well, like just find your passion and do that for a living. And yes, I think you can if you want to, but if not, I think we can all reframe our mindset while we're at whatever job it is to still, I don't know, plug those holes of connection, whether they be at work or outside of work.
Right. What I'll say is, you're exactly right, and I don't want to come off as a privileged old white guy who's telling everybody, follow your passion. But you are exactly right. If you are a janitor in a building right now, your work is so critical to the health and safety of every person who passes through that building. And so every role along the way, there is a purpose there. And the only question is, can I find my purpose in here? Can I
Hmm.
find what it is that I need out of this and align myself with that?
Yes. And that's something I think some companies have been really good about instilling that, the mission and the vision and the values throughout the workforce so that every employee feels it. But like if you work for a company that hasn't done that, like you can find that like by yourself. You can find the importance of the work that you do just kind of in your own mind to make it more meaningful work.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay. So you have this big realization, this conversation with your friend. So then what did you do to tackle that?
Yeah. Well, first, it was good that I had acknowledged where I was. So it's important to say it, right? To name it and claim it, and just say there it is. I'm isolated, I'm stressed, I'm anxious, I'm depressed, and so I acknowledged that. The other thing that I did, he was a little bit he was a Yoda to my Luke Skywalker. He sort of guided me a little bit. He handed me this book, Lost Connections by Johann Hari, and I read that, and it sort of gave me permission to say, all right, if I've been so miserable, what would it look like if I lived a year of personal bests? If I were living my best life in my, physical, emotional, intellectual, spiritual, social, marital, parental, vocational, financial, avocational, if I was living my best life in all these areas, what would that look like? And then how would I know if I was living my best year? So the first thing I had to do was figure out how I would measure that. If it's my intention, and I've heard you talk a little bit about intention. If it's my intention to live my best year this year, then what would that look like? And so I had to figure out how to measure that. And one of the things I did was I created a little self assessment, a little slider bar thing that if I slide it all the way to the right, it means I'm just knocking it out of the park. And I slide it all the way to the left, it means I'm sort of stinking up the place. And so, I did this little self assessment. And then I found out, then I sort of cataloged, here are all the things that I actually can measure, and a good one that you can always measure well is your health, right? So you can measure body mass index or heart rate or number of hours that you sleep or all kinds of things. And so I measured everything I could measure, and then I used this self-assessment to sort of fill in the gaps. And I set myself some goals. So I said, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10 in this area, I'm a 7. What would a 10 look like? What would it take for me to close that gap? And then I created goals in each of those areas and steps along the way. And then I had, daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly kind of things that I was doing. And, so if I'm trying to build relationships, how often am I going to call that person? Am I going to send them a birthday card handwritten? Am I going to, what else would I do if I was trying to build that relationship? So I put all these goals out there, and I constructed this sort of year of activities, and then I followed through. I had little checklists and little lists that I'm following and going, and once you get going with something like that, it kind of gains a little bit of momentum. I have a saying, and it came from the book that I wrote last year, which was miracles find you while you're in motion. And it's kind of like, I don't know how I'm going to get this done, but I'm in motion. And so
Mhm.
I'm doing my best. But then what happens is there are these little coincidences that show up.
Oh
This,
yeah.
little moments of serendipity or synchronicity or miracles or whatever you want to call those things. And it sort of starts to build on itself then. So I knew I was heading in the right direction. And then, I could talk more about the results if you want, but that's what I did.
So, all right, I do want to know the results, but first of all, I just want to say I love that because it's like you took this very organized, like productivity approach to happiness. It was kind of like, all right, like here's what I'm going to do to like have a more happy and fulfilling life, and I'm going to, create all these lists and check marks and stuff, and I love that because it's like we can sit here and say, oh, I'm going to live an intentional life and I'm going to fit all this into my day and my week. And I am 100% guilty of doing this. Like, all right, I'm going to each morning, I'm going to spend some quiet time with just me before I check my phone. And then I'm going to get a workout in. I'm going to spend quality time talking to my boyfriend, and I'm going to call my mother and like all that stuff. But our brains, I feel like that's what our soul, our spirit wants to do, but then our brains are these just habit machines.
Right.
And so like we might have the best of intention to fit all that stuff in, but like our brain isn't necessarily going to remember it until we almost like hack it so that it becomes a habit. And so you've got to kind of play in its game of lists and to-do lists and goals and all that stuff to get that movement, like you said, going, so that then it kind of just continues moving on its own.
Right. One of the things that I read about during that year was that on average, the average human thinks between 60 and 70,000 thoughts per day. And some people will say 50,000, whatever the number is. And yet 95% of those thoughts are the same thoughts that you thought yesterday. And
Yes.
we fall into these habits of thinking. And it's even worse when we are stressed. So, cortisol is released into the body, and then that triggers some adrenaline. And now your immune system is suppressed, and your heart rate is up, and your blood pressure is up, and you're just sort of you're in this chemical bath. And so stress causes us to get stuck. And I think it's, I won't even call who it is because I know who it is, but I don't know that I want to promote him or not, because I still have mixed feelings about all this. But he says, I like this phrase. He said, the brain cells that fire together get wired together. And so it's like we get into this habitual thinking. And I think that is part of it, that we have to uh, reframe things. We have to sort of break the mold. We have to break the habits. And I don't know that somebody else would thrive in the kind of approach that I took, but it's sort of how I'm built. I am
Hmm.
built on accountability. That if I don't hold myself accountable for the things that I do, I'll give you one silly example. I made a commitment to get up and weigh myself every day. Now, some people would just rather put a screwdriver through their eye than to get up and do that every day. But I had heard it from somebody else who had lost, some massive amount of weight. And he said, one of the things he did when he was losing his weight and the way that he kept it off over this long period of time was he weighed himself every day. And so I would. And I would sometimes I'd get up and I'd be sleepy and I'd throw on my blue jeans and I'd start stumbling downstairs to get my coffee and I go, oh, didn't weigh myself. So I've got to go back upstairs to where my bathroom scale is and I've got to, strip everything off and it's cold in the morning and I don't want to do it, but I had made this commitment to myself. And I think I'm very strong on accountability that if I didn't have an accountability buddy, I had to be my own accountability buddy. And I had to say to myself, okay, Tony, you made a commitment to this. Is this something you want? Yes or no? And I used to say, um, be, do, have, that if we figure out what it is that we want to have, then we need to figure out what we need to do in order to have that. But before we can do that, we have to figure out, am I the kind of person who would do these things in order to have that thing? So be, do, have. The one thing I would add in there today, I would say be, connect, do, have. That it's important that we not try to do this in isolation. And so, I had friends that were cheering me on, and I was sharing some stuff with them, and so I think that emotional support and that reinforcement, I think it helps a lot.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point that we're all different. And so I think this is where self-awareness really comes into play is you have to know what works for you. So like you
Yeah,
said, like not everyone would maybe thrive in the system that you use, but like it worked for you and you knew it would work for you. And I might be able to sit here and say, okay, well that would never work for me because I'm not good on doing things every day, or I don't like to be held to that, or whatever my reasons are. And if that's true for me, fine. But I think a lot of times we're kind of lying to ourselves because what we're being asked to do is uncomfortable or difficult, or the fear of failure and all that stuff. So I think we all need to be like aware of how we really do work best, and then and be honest with ourselves about that. But I think no matter what that looks like, commitment, like that's the key thing. Like it's got to be a commitment, and you commit to things that are priorities. So it's like it's got to be
right.
a priority. You've got to commit to it. But then that commitment can be all different shapes and sizes based on just however you best function in the world.
Yeah. The other thing that I had discovered about myself is when I am stressed, I do these comforting behaviors, right? So I will go get some chocolate and eat it, or I will check Facebook obsessively, or I will, go out for a run, which is okay, except, if I could overdo that and injure myself. So I will be trying to comfort myself because I am stressed. And sometimes the behaviors that are getting in the way, they're actually behaviors that we're doing in order to try to soothe ourselves because we are so stressed. And so I had to laugh. A friend of mine posted on Facebook yesterday. She said, well, I'm going to have to make my third trip to the liquor store to get 2 weeks supply of liquor now. So so, we all have our ways of dealing with these things, but if you don't deal with them, if you don't work through them, then you're going to be caught in that trap of these soothing, comforting behaviors that are sort of poor coping mechanisms.
Yes. I completely agree. I love that. I think that that is a really good point. And again, it's that awareness and just being honest with ourselves about how we work and why we're really doing what we're doing. Is it really soothing or is it escaping? Like that's been a whole big, battle with me of am I escaping my feelings right now, or is this really what I need for self-care? And
Right.
that's a whole other conversation for another
Yeah.
day. But I do want to know what were some of your results from your
Yeah.
year of personal bests?
Yeah, so I have a little spider graph, and I don't know if you know what that is, but like I measured myself on the scale of 1 to 10, and then I plotted it on a little graph in a circle, and then at the end of the year, I plotted it on a circle, and I could see growth in all these areas. So my well-being, my health was better, my relationships were better, and believe it or not, my business grew significantly. And I chalk that up to the fact that I had more available to give to the business because I was
Mm,
practicing self-care. And so I was present with more. I was clearer on what I needed to do. I wasn't as frantic. I was more focused. But just to give you one example on my physical well-being, because it's easy to measure, right? I'm a little bit of a runner, and runners measure themselves on their personal records, right? So when you run a marathon or you run a 5K or whatever, you say, I set a PR. This is my best race I've ever run. And so I was 60 years old, and at the age of 60, I set a new personal record in 13 different race distances from the 1 mile all the way through the marathon. I had never
Wow.
run that fast before. So I ran 1,790 miles last year, and that's basically the distance from Minneapolis to Miami. I could run by your house and wave as I went by, I guess, if
Yeah,
I wanted
you don't want to go to Miami right now. Trust me.
to.
There's
No,
all
it's
kinds
not.
of coronavirus down there.
Yeah, I use this app called Strava, and you upload your Garmin watch or whatever, you upload your stuff to Strava, and it keeps track of your miles. It keeps track also of your fitness. And so, according to Strava, my fitness level went up 218% last year. I
Wow.
started a plant based diet, and my LDL is down 29%. My triglycerides are down 38%. Total cholesterol down 40%. And I lost 16.4 pounds across the year. And I didn't need to lose a ton of weight. I am pretty much now close to my perfect ideal weight. So no one would encourage me to lose more than I've lost already. And it wasn't a big crash off and then I had to struggle to keep it off. It sort of fell off over the time period. And the other thing that I tracked was I slept at least 7.5 hours every day. Sometimes I even took naps in the afternoon, and I also can see how much deep sleep I had and how well I was sleeping. So all of that sort of added up to the fact that I was very I was gaining in that area. So I could take almost any area and point to the fact that I had growth in all those areas.
I love that. So this was last year?
Yes, in 2019, and I will acknowledge that 2020 is not 2019, right? If I if I'm living my personal best this year, it looks different. But I think that's a good point, though, Casey. I think my personal best, or even my personal better, doesn't have to look a certain way. I think it's really important that we have grace for ourselves, that we let go of judgment about these things, and that we say within the circumstances I'm in, this is my personal best. That my best may look different than your best.
Yes, I think that is such an important point for this year, but really just all the time, because I think
Right.
it's a very thin line between, okay, I'm going to go out here, I'm going to do all this stuff, and my intention is good because I want to be happier, live a more fulfilling life, I want more connected relationships, and so I'm going to do XYZ every day and ABC every week, and that's what I'm going to do. Then when you miss some of those things,
Hmm.
in that moment, you're faced with a choice of kind of all of this, oh, I effed it up, and like shame, and you
Hmm.
feel guilty that you didn't do it, and then all the negative self-talk. Or to your point, like you give yourself a little grace and like self-compassion, be like, okay, I messed up, missed this one, but that's okay. Like right now is a moment to restart and kind of recommit. And I just, especially in this world of personal development, where I now live, I think it's such an important intersection of accepting where you are in any given moment, yet also recognizing where you can be better. And like it's so easy to tip into a negative mindset in that intersection. And so that's something I try and constantly be self-aware, because it's like if you go too far into the acceptance, are you letting yourself get lazy? If you go too far into the trying to get better, are you judging yourself? And so that's a difficult it's a difficult line to walk.
Right, right. I think it is, so that mental aspect of it. One of the things last year I had to remind myself about, I went back and watched the Brene Brown thing about the difference between guilt and shame, and that her TED talk was about, guilt is I did something bad, and shame is I am bad. And those are
Mm,
so different.
hmm.
So that we can beat ourselves up about it, or we can say, this is my journey, this is my path, and this is what I'm doing. And I totally, again, I just want to point out one more time that I have privilege. I don't I when I get up in the morning, I don't have three kids in the house that are all trying to go out the door and they've lost their sock, and and just I am in this position where I had the time and talent, treasure, and whatever. I could focus on these things, but still, I think within context, we all can do something.
Right. Well, but I mean, you put in the time and the work to get to that point. So like, don't discredit that. Like you earned that. You earned the right to have your days be much more flexible. So there's nothing wrong with that. But you do bring up a good point that we've got to be oh we've got to give ourselves grace with where we are in life. So if you
Right.
are, if your mornings do consist of getting a bunch of kids up, and I guess now they're not going out to school, but now you've got to try and get them to sit at a computer and pay attention and all that, then yeah, that's going to change what you're able to do in terms of your quote unquote best than, you know, 20 years from now when they're grown and gone to college or living lives of their own. So I think
Right.
it's, that awareness and grace in terms of where you are in your life now, and then what is feasible for you to do to make yourself feel better, but not like try and kill yourself.
Exactly.
Ah, okay. I love it. All right. So I want to close with just what is some advice you would give? Because I'm big on like first steps, because that is,
Yeah.
that's all we can ever really do is like that next step. So for people who are feeling disconnected, and kind of uninspired with life, like you were when you were talking to your friend, and given the current year, and what we've got going on right now, like what is some advice you would give people to just start to move in a happier direction?
Yeah. So I'll give you a little framing, and then I'll give you like three pieces of advice. And so the framing is this: at the beginning of the year, when I had this breakfast with Michael, the thing I told him was, I don't understand the point. I just don't get what I'm doing here. Right. So that was part of my journey over 2019, just figuring out what's the answer for me of what is the purpose of life. And I know that
Mm.
it's a tiny little question, has,
It's
it's so we should just flippantly ask and answer it, right? But it was the question that was burning for me. What am I here for? And so here's what I landed on. I feel like for me, I'm here to connect, and that includes connecting with other people, connecting with nature, connecting with a higher power, connecting with the universe, connecting. So I am here and I am built to connect. And we know that because we grew up in tribes, and that, the people who are in the tribes, they succeeded. And that's why connecting is so important. And I'm here to contribute. So I'm here to put a ding in the corner of the universe. I want to make a difference. And so I'm here to connect with others, and I'm here to contribute to the world. But before I can connect and before I can contribute, I first have to practice self care. Or, in other words, I have to thrive. And so that has become my new mantra: thrive, connect, contribute. The three pieces of advice I would give, and it really has to do with what I'm learning right now about resilience. And so the three things that I've been thinking about recently about resilience is, first of all, recognize the importance of self-care, which is what we've been talking about this entire time. Recognize the importance of self-care. You cannot pour from an empty vessel. The second thing is resources are available. That if you think about it, there are family and friends, and for heaven's sake, we have the internet today, that we
Mhm.
didn't have before. There are resources available to you, and sometimes when we're stressed, we forget that we have resources available. And then the last thing is the thing that keeps coming up in this conversation, it's reframe. There are times when you are trying to make progress and you aren't making progress, and you can step back and reframe the situation. I mean, I have someone that I love and adore, and she's an addict. And so in the last year, I had to learn that, in Al-Anon, they have this phrase that I didn't cause it. Yeah, I didn't cause it. I can't control it, and I can't cure it. And that is a framing that helps me to deal with that very stressful situation. So sometimes we need a new frame to see things through. So I think if I were to say anything, it's just number one, recognize the need for self care. 2, resources are available to you. And 3, reframing sometimes does the trick.
I love it. Absolutely perfect. Tell everybody where they can find you, follow you, your book. I think you're about to start a podcast. Is that correct?
Yes, just started one. Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So my name is Tony Loyd, but the tricky bit is my last name is spelled with one L. So it's TonyLoyd. So you can find me at tonyloyd.com, TonyLoyd with one L. And most places I am Tony Loyd. On Instagram, I am Anthony Loyd. And there's a weird story behind why I'm Anthony and not Tony on there. But anyway, we won't tell it now. I do have a book. It's called Crazy Good Advice: 10 Lessons Learned from 150 Leading Social Entrepreneurs. You can actually get it. What I did was, in anticipation of this conversation, I put it up for free on my website. So
Oh,
if you
wow.
go to tonyloyd.com and just right there, big green button that says get this book for free. And I have even some bonus material that comes with it that you can have to go with that too. It hit number one bestseller in one category on Amazon, but it's been out for a year or two. And so, I don't need to be making a lot of money right now in this situation. I need to help as many people as I possibly can. So, I have 2 podcasts. One is called Social Entrepreneur, and the other is new. It's called Thrive, Connect, Contribute. Wouldn't you figure after this conversation,
Yep.
that's what it would be called? But we're telling stories of people who are resilient in the face of adversity. The first story just dropped the other day, and it's about a mom who has her kids at home, and the 2 kids decide to start a podcast, and it's called Audio Applesauce. And I interviewed the 10-year-old and the 8-year-old, and it is twice as cute as you can imagine. I mean, they are just amazing kids. So, you can look for that.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. We are definitely kindred spirits in many ways. So this was a great conversation. Just thank you so much.
You're welcome. And Casey, thanks so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
All right, that is it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed it, please consider giving the podcast a rating and a review and sharing it with anyone else you think will enjoy this conversation. Make sure that you are subscribed to the show so you don't miss some of the amazing conversations we have coming up. You can also follow the podcast on Instagram or Facebook at The Better You Podcast. If you've got feedback for me or want to reach me, you are more than welcome to email me at thebetteryoupodcast@gmail.com. I appreciate you all so much. Thank you for spending this time with me. I know there are tons of podcast options out there, and I just love that you have chosen to listen to mine and hope you come back more. That's it. Have a wonderful rest of your day.